So in 1994, I graduated college from Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan, and I moved to Tennessee in January 1995, and I worked for a few months and decided to move into a van. And I was partnered with a woman called Lisa, and we had a daughter, and her name was Ruby, and she was like 2, not even 2 years old yet. And we got a Ford Econoline. I bought it. We lived in Hendersonville. I think y'all know where that is, kind of near Gallatin. And that's not my van. I couldn't find a good picture, but that looks almost exactly like what our van looked like. And in April 1995, we left Hendersonville, and we lived in the van from April 7th till November of 95. And we left Tennessee, went to North Carolina and Virginia, came back to Tennessee, went north, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan. We went into Ontario and Quebec, and we came down through Vermont, New Hampshire, and traveled up through the Northeast, came back through Tennessee. We kept coming back through Tennessee. It was sort of like our home base and our hub. So we stopped in Tennessee several times during the excursion. Went to Arkansas, Oklahoma, through the tip of Texas, New Mexico, all the way to Northern California. Came back across through like Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, and up to Wisconsin. Made our way back through the Midwest. Ended up in the Northeast, Washington, D.C. area, and then traveled down the eastern seaboard and ended up in the southernmost tip of the United States in Key West, Florida, where we lived in early 1996. And I lived there for about 3 months, and then I moved to Tennessee to stay in the spring of 1996, and I haven't left since. And this is just some of our itinerary. Some of the quotes are from my journals that I kept that year. I've got 3 bound journals that just covered that time period. That's Ruby and me asleep on the beach in North Carolina somewhere early on in the journey. She's now a sophomore in high school. We didn't have that much money saved up, and almost all of our money went to gas and food. And so when we camped, we went to where there were public campgrounds that didn't charge a fee. And usually these were more primitive campgrounds. A lot of them didn't have showers or even flush toilets, but a lot of times they're very remote and incredibly beautiful. And I would say probably communing with nature was one of my things that I held in common with the protagonist of our book. And we tried to spend a lot of our time in the wilderness, but we also spent a lot of our time with people that we met on the road. And probably one of the more selfless things, there's a lot of selfish aspects to this lifestyle, but one of the selfless things that I did was taking care of this one because we were being all eco and everything. We had to use cloth diapers, and probably when we couldn't get to a laundromat, I ended up washing those by hand. That was probably like the bravest thing I ever did. And we traveled through all the states. The itinerary, this is the direction of the itinerary that I just showed you guys up on the map. I don't know if I really believed this or not, but I wrote it in my journal. All these other quotes are quotes to things that I actually wrote, but I think I actually believed a little bit it's possible to live a more primal lifestyle actually for the long term. And I actually tried that here in Tennessee. I lived rurally for 13 years in DeKalb County, and civilization is kind of grown on me after I've really tried to live. I'm really enjoying my creature comforts here in town these days. There was a guy on television just the other night on the Colbert Report who has a website called huntergatherer.com, and he actually believes for a diet. He lives in the inner city of like New York City, but he actually believes for a diet that human beings can live on the same kind of foods that hunter-gatherers lived on. So he primarily eats meat and vegetables exclusively, no processed foods. It's a very interesting idea, but I was inspired by a lot of the kinds of things that kind of back to the nature kind of vibe. There's Ruby riding a horse. I would say probably national forests of the United States. If you haven't been to that many of them, I would say, make it a priority in your life on this earth to go and check out this country. This United States that we live in is one of the most beautiful places on earth, and I've seen so much beauty just in those years when I had the privilege to travel with Ruby and Lisa, and we had a great time. I would probably say, though, the close confines of a small camper, it wore me out, and just not having very much of anything. We were very poor in terms of our actual access to money during that time, and so we had to really live real close to the edge, almost like hobos, not quite. I did, though, I asked you all this at the beginning of the unit, I did eat in a soup kitchen in that time period, and I did dumpster dive food during that time period, just to make it through the road trip. There's Ruby. That's actually the actual van that we lived in. Behind her there. She's about 18 months on this road trip. She was potty trained by the end of the road trip, amazingly so. And so finally, I wrote in my journal in November that we had landed. The ship had landed in Key West. I love Key West. We had an awesome time there. I wrote to my mom and dad last week, and they reassured me. I wanted to know if they thought I was like, they read the book and they saw this movie with me, and I asked them if they thought I was in any way like Chris, and they said that they saw a lot of me in Chris, but that I was more of a social person, more outgoing, more interested in community, maybe not as cynical about society as he was, but that clearly for a time period in my 20s and 30s, I was trying to kind of reject some of the middle class accoutrements that now in my 40s I've come to appreciate and respect quite a bit. My mom wrote again after she wrote me that, yeah, my parents really are named Barbie and Ken. She wrote me that I called all the time. I don't remember that, but she said I wrote letters and I called all the time, so I never left them out of the loop. And Ruby Jazz turned out okay. She's a sophomore. She wants to go to MTSU and major in graphic design, and she's an awesome teenager. And she turned out okay. I don't get to see her as often as I'd like since she lives with her mom in another county, but she's a good kid, and she wasn't too badly warped by living with her parents in a caravan for one of the first years of her life. We're out of time. Have a great weekend. Please read Beloved for Monday. Follow your syllabus. Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.